for being part of all the events, various events that I do. So I really like that. And we have to continue our evolution of the mediator. That episode has to happen the next one, whenever you give me time.
Maybe after Dilip goes back to England. That would be a good time.
Perfect. And of course, thank you, Nina, for dropping in. Like I said, all panelists can drop in, but I think that whole concept of the speaker kind of thing is coming.
But
Bernie, what I'm
that's
going to
why
do
I
is,
asked you, because I was unsure.
yeah, I know. Perfect.
But it's a pleasure to hear. Thank you. Yeah.
Only thing, Nina, it's not that you've come in and you just get away with just sitting there. You have to tell us about the conference. Bernie, this is a new format. I'm asking people to tell me about the conference instead of me talking about it. Yes, Nina, what is the conference? What does it mean to you?
Okay, so Mediator Vikram, I just got to know him, and not just very recently, and he has a fantastic program where he brings mediators together, and all those sessions started in the mid-May, I think, 2022, and will continue till the last day of June. And today we have the pleasure to meet Bernard Meyers. Yeah.
Perfect. That's it. That's all about the conference. Anything about what your takeaways up to? Okay, we'll maybe talk about it on the last day. So, okay, so perfect. So this 18th May to 30th June, all recordings available. And Bernie Mayer is talking about mediators, mediation, and neutrality. So Bernie, totally your topic with all your books, where you have to start it off.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll start it off by talking about just building on the back of a session I did have a chance to watch some of that you did, which was on truth and honesty, which I thought was very interesting. And I don't know how long ago that was, but I just watched it a few days ago. And what I thought about in watching that, and I'd like to know what you think, Vikram, was that it was really looking at honesty and truth and the difference between them from the point of view of the mediator, and also to some extent from the participants, but certainly from the point of view of the mediator and how they experienced it personally. And that was very interesting. I think that's a very important topic. And what do we do when we're put in the position that we can't truthfully say we are neutral? What do we do when we can't truthfully say, I can do this for you, because maybe, for example, that person has triggered us in some way. And I was thinking about it after I listened to some of that, and I thought, yeah, but there's another element of that, which is, what about the way in which the whole system we've set up, the whole identity we've established as a field, the whole structure of what we promise and offer to people has built into it something that is not quite authentic, is not quite truthful, is not quite in sync with what we can offer. And in a way, that's the theme of a lot of what I've written, and in particularly this book, which Jackie Font Guzman and I co-authored, The Neutrality Trap. Because it seems to me we have sort of built our professional identity around the concept that you should trust us, you should come to us, because we don't have an axe to grind here, because we are not going to be on one person's side or another, because we are not going to be biased, because we're going to be impartial, whatever words you want to use. And therefore, nothing that we do or say is going to be to advantage one side or another. It is going to be, instead, we are going to work to help you come to your own solution, to your own way of moving forward. Now, a large part of that, I think, is phony, because we can't do it. It's not a possible, it's something, we're offering something that is really not, it's not even intellectually doable. And it's certainly, we run into practical problems with it all the time. For example, if I am mediating a divorce, let's say, and there's a man and a woman in the room, there's now two men and a woman. And that is a form of structural imbalance. Let's just call it that for the moment. And then I think if most mediators are honest with themselves, they have opinions. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually. We have opinions about what's going on. We have beliefs about what's going on. We have people who it's easier for us to communicate, easier for us to be empathetic with than with the other person. And maybe another thing just to talk about for a second is that everything we do has an impact on the outcome. It's impossible to say that we're not here to have an impact on the outcome. The distinction between process and outcome is not a genuine distinction. Process flows into outcome. Outcome flows into process, for that matter. So to me, it seems there's a structural problem with what we're offering, and moreover, in at least most of the cases I do and have done, there are power differences, and if we are strictly neutral, we are inevitably siding with a more powerful person. If we do not do anything that helps kind of bring the power differentials, can't necessarily take them away, but at least brings it into account about how it's going to play in the mediation, then I think we are inevitably enhancing the power of the more powerful person. And we see this all the time. We see it all the time. If there is a mediation between a manager and an employee who feels they have been mistreated, and the employee is not comfortable in that setting, doesn't feel they can use the language of mediation and settlement talk effectively, and we just say, well, we're here to help the two of you talk to each other, and these are the ground rules, which is a word that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people. For example, the language we use plays into this, and we are going to hear all the options, understand the concerns and interests people have. We very likely, depending on the nature of the position the employee works in and the background they come from, we're very likely going to have really put the employee in an uncomfortable position. So we have to do something that takes that into account. And in more major public policy issues, it becomes even a bigger problem, because oftentimes the different people bring, not just in big public policy issues, but in many issues, bring major different resources to the table. So for all of those reasons, I think the neutrality concept is a very tricky one. Now, maybe just to take a sidestep, and I want to say one more thing, and then I'd love to get I know how you get people talking, Vikram. I want you to do that. The Neutrality Trap, the Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change, was not specifically written for mediators. It includes mediators as its target audience, but it was written for anybody interested in social change and in peace and justice issues in the world. And there the concept was that we have to actually get beyond thinking about what we're all about is helping people come together and dialogue and connect and communicate, which is certainly an important part of what has to happen in social change, but it is not the be all and end all of it, because it's also a part of social change is how we disrupt the systems that are creating major problems of oppression or in dealing with what makes our world less sustainable. So we were had been thinking about this for quite a while, but after in the United States, George Floyd was murdered, there were all sorts of people in our field who came together and said, well, we have to have dialogue between police and communities. And my reaction was, well, at some point, police and communities they have in the past, they will in the future, need to come together to talk. But there is a movement saying we need to empower ourselves to actually insist on something different. And we don't need to right away say to that movement, hey, cool it a little bit, let's calm things down, let's get you talking to the police. We have to understand the importance of building the movement and having actions that are disruptive. And in my own personal background, I've been an activist in the civil rights movement, in the labor movement, in the environmental movement, and in other arenas. And as well, that was before I ever got into the conflict field. And I know how immediately negotiating before you really, and trying to calm things down before you really establish a movement's presence, it's more complicated than that. And we've tried to talk about that in there. So maybe I'll stop at that point. I think the basic elevator speech has been given now about what the book's about, and let's talk further.
What I should do is at least put the cover of the book up there, because obviously that talking books had happened. This is also available on the YouTube. Please search it. Like I tell people, just search Mediator Vikram and put Bernie Mayer after that. You'll get all the things that he's been out there on. So please read the book. But Bernie, always look in that. I mean, that of course is always a short time to discuss things like this. But the fine line between activism, advocacy, neutrality, the mediation, the mediator, everything, all those, how balancing all that, and what your thoughts on that are. I mean, I don't know what all can I ask about it, because it's
all right, let me look. There is a difference between mediation and advocacy, and it's an important one. On the other hand, mediators have to advocate at times. They have to advocate for a certain approach to a process that's consonant with their purposes and values. So I advocate, for example, for people to genuinely listen to each other, and that is a form of advocacy. I advocate for it to be for conversations to happen within a certain conceptual framework. I think a way of getting at some of this is to ask the question, what do we really mean to offer people? What are we trying to say, this is why we can help you, when we say we're being neutral, impartial, unbiased, multi-partial, whatever the language we want to use? What is it? And I think we are offering something important that we can offer, which is, we are really committed to helping empower people to deal with their own issues and their own problems in a constructive way. We are offering our commitment to that. We are offering our authenticity. We're offering transparency about any connections we might have. We're offering a experience with doing this kind of work. We're offering a certain amount of our values as well. For example, we're offering values that we do believe people should listen to each other, and we do believe that everybody has a right to have a voice that is heard, that has an impact on a conversation about issues of this nature. We're offering our ability to help people frame issues in a constructive way that includes both of their most essential and valid, I would say, interests, so that they can understand it. And there are a lot of things that we're offering along those lines, and this is discussed amply in the book about what it is. So I've often done this exercise with people and said, try explaining what you do and what you offer without using the words biased or unbiased, partial or impartial, neutral or neutral in there. And in fact, what we can offer something that I think actually resonates with people, which is, look, we're here to help you have the conversation you need to have, that's constructive to have. We're trying to do it in a way that helps you deal with the obstacles to having such a genuine conversation. We're not intentionally advocating one person's essential interests at the expense of another. But we are going to do stuff that really helps you both have or all of you have an important voice at the table.
Well, I'm going to connect it to, I mean, of course, you might have looked at it in the book. Look, you have the whole traditional, we call this the indigenous methods of mediation and how they were going about it, and the role of the mediator in that society, all those aspects. And then somewhere we came out with this box, which we called mediation, and said, this is mediation. And there was some in that, there's some purists in that, and this is all it is going to be. So have we done disservice to mediation by sometimes maybe tying the hands of the mediator and then not having the mediator have a larger role? Because look, I mean, maybe we would not like it, but what came out from the US might be true for that society, being an individualistic society. So maybe they came out with a model based on that. But then there is a larger role maybe in society of mediators, which we should, of course, highlight and take forward. I don't know how. I mean, whether
that's completely right. I completely agree with that, Vikram. And even in the U.S., though, it's we're a pretty diverse society in our own way. Let me tell you a story, actually, just to illustrate what you're talking about. I did some work a number of years back, and my organization, CDR Associates, did some work with a number of Native American groups. And one of the people we end up interacting with, one of the sets of people we interacted with were Navajo Peacemakers. And these were people who, from a kind of using indigenous processes, worked to help solve disputes within the Navajo Nation. And perhaps sometimes they work between Navajos and others as well. And I have been part of some of those efforts myself. And they're very interesting. And they use circle processes, which is many indigenous groups around the world really use to deal with problems. But it was interesting to hear the Navajo Peacemakers' description of the traditional process he might use. And so imagine the issue was that maybe one person had some cattle that broke through to another person's land and did some damage, and now they had to figure out what happened and whose responsibility was that the fencing wasn't kept up, and how do you deal with that? And so they're going to want some help in bringing people together. That was an example I remember being used. And his description was very interesting. That, they brought all the people together who were relevant, and that involved usually more than just the principals, but some of their families and occasionally some elders in their clans or family or whatever. And they would start with what's called the Smudge Ceremony, which is you burn sage and pass it around the room, and the smoke goes over everybody, and you say prayers, and then you start by everybody going around the room and declaring their clan affiliations, including the peacemaker. And all their set of clan affiliations, and there can be their major clan, a secondary clan, a matrilineal clan, a patrilineal clan. I don't even remember all the different ways, but they would do it until everybody found some clan connection, including with the mediator. And then they might start in different ways telling their stories, and often there would be circle processes used for that. What was interesting to me about that was the way in which credibility got established was through finding the connection that people had rather than the distance. Whereas, you go to a business mediation or to a law mediation, and there we say our credibility as mediators is we have distance from people. And equidistance is often used. In the indigenous form, it is no. In fact, what gives credibility is we have connection with everybody. I don't know if they would say equal connection, but certainly connection. And if you look at what in different groups, who actually acts as mediators or can at least sanction people acting as mediators, it is the elders. And I remember reading something by John Paul Lederach, you're probably familiar with, who's a friend of mine. We were students together. He described working in Central America he worked on a lot of mediation processes there, and he said that who is a credible mediator in indigenous groups, societies there, or were the elder in a village, and that elder could be, if you and I were in a conflict, it could be your uncle, but that's who was credible, and we've had traditional roles of that throughout. You and I've talked a little bit about some of the roles you've seen in India and elsewhere that are equivalent to that everywhere. So, but what happened was when mediation in the U.S., when mediation first was getting going beyond the labor movement, where it had been going on for a long time, but in business and in marital disputes, divorce disputes, and community disputes, the model that people were working off of was, well, what do we have to do to be able to put ourselves forward as professionals? It was a model of objectivity, which is another problem we can talk about, and of professionalism. And you can trust me because of all my training. And we have to make sure that the main people who will refer cases to us, or we have to convince we're reasonable offering, are the legal community, for example. And so we have to use their language and their values. And it's not like we thought consciously that way, because we often came from that background. We just did it. And that meant we used the language of we're objective, and our emotions don't come into play here. It's just an analytical process, and that's how we're doing it. And I think that really is a real disservice to what really needs to happen to deal with our deeper conflicts. There may be certain business conflicts, fine, and I've certainly been part of some of those. But if we're really dealing with the deeper conflicts that our world, our society, our families, our communities, our organizations face, that really ties our hands, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said about this, the way the business mediations, that the expectation is something where the person maybe is not themselves in that. But what I did was there was one high value mediation that I did, and I actually put that video out with he's the legal head of a large company. And in that, I put it out only because he says that, Vikram, you brought the human touch. On a high value commercial mediation, whoever talks about that. But I said, this is the way I am. This is the way I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can't lose touch with that aspect of you. So that is something which I think we need to spread. I think this is what you just said about exactly, of course, traditional and the connection to society, community. So Benny, how are we going to take that forward? Or how are we going to push that? You have to give us some direction. This is Mediation Vision 2026. We don't have, whatever's happened has happened. We'll have to take it forward in the right way, as I would call it.
Well, first of all, I like the human touch language, because I like it for a number of reasons, because in a way, what makes us human is not just that we're logical beings. What makes us is all sorts of ways in which we can communicate, which we can use our emotions, which we can empathize with people, which emotional intelligence becomes important, etc. And in a way, when you say that, I think that's almost automatically what triggers for people. Right? So I'm gonna start using that. I think that's good. But I would also say that I think it is happening. I think more and more people are getting it. I'm not sure they're getting it. Those people who are sitting down, mediating between, I don't know, Microsoft and Apple or whatever. But maybe they are. Maybe they are. But if you listen to it in the language that's being used more, and in the training that's being used more, that's one way. And I also, obviously, I've tried to, over my career, help with that by critiquing our in a what I call being a loving critique of mediation, as we've done it over a number of years and a number of books and in other ways too. But I also think the world's demanding it. I mean, I think the problems we face are not problems that are going to simply be handled in a technocratic way. You know, they really require mobilizing all we have to offer as individuals and as groups, and they require systemic change. And systemic change doesn't happen by simple people coming down to agree about it. It happens by systems being pushed and forced to change. And those systems are often rooted in very deep systems like colonialism, which you and I have talked about before. And I think that that what we have to challenge ourselves to do is not to simply see every problem. Well, you know the saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Not to see every problem as one that requires sitting people together, talking about what their interests are, brainstorming solutions, and coming up with an answer. And the problems are much more difficult than that. They require that we really look at the systemic nature of the problems, at the obstacles that are faced to doing something about it. They require that we help people tell their stories in a deep and compelling way, which is often painful. They mean we have to confront some issues we'd rather not talk about often, like racism or sexual or gender or sexual violence, or knowing how hard that can be and dangerous at times that can be. And it also realizes that all of us requires that all of us face how in some ways we are part of the systems that need to change, and we benefit from our part in those systems. And so the world's demanding. And if we don't, all of us, commit ourselves to doing all we can to be part of the change that needs to happen, even at the same time we're part of the system maintenance process as well, then we face some really difficult times. And so, I think as people grow up with that reality, I mean, as they face that reality, they will want to find ways of connecting with people who are different from them, but not just in a way that says, let's say everybody's equal and we're just going to focus in a superficial way of understanding and connecting with each other.
Yep. But also, I think, Bernie, what you have to do is, of course, all the experience that you've had all that experience. But today, if you have to put the foundations for mediation in the world, you're starting from scratch. Say, there's a concept called mediation. Now you want to start. What are the steps that you would want to take? Because I don't want to say undo things, because undoing is like by itself a whole different process. But if you want to set up a positive thing, because the thing is, Bernie, that a lot of countries, things is just taking off. It's just about taking off. Well, I mean, we're looking at global situation. So in that kind of a thing to put into place from the neutrality aspect, of course, if you want to on that, but on a larger level, what would you tell them how to go about it?
Well, I wouldn't tell them how to go about it at all. I would work with it. I would start by telling them how I've experienced it in my cultural context. All right. So let me take a step back here too. I think I've worked in a lot of different countries around the world. I'm never in India. I'm sorry to say, but in a variety of different societies and cultural contexts. And I've tried to approach it by saying that, anytime you bring in somebody with my experience, we hope we have some ideas and experiences and stories to tell and insights to give, but we don't know how to tell others how to do it, and because we're not them. And so I remember speaking to an early Mediators Beyond Borders conference in Washington, where I was asked to, I think, do the opening talk. And I remember saying to them, your challenge is to figure out what do you have to offer in the societies or places you go that doesn't involve training, giving money, or being a mediator. Not that you won't ever do those things, but Just think about that for a moment, because what I experienced often happens is I would go into we would get a grant or something to work on an issue. Like we worked for quite a while after the fall of communism in the Balkans and in Eastern Europe on helping them establish mediation processes. And what people would want us, what people would want from us is they saw us as coming with resources. To put it more bluntly, they saw us as coming with dollars, with money. We were Americans. We had money. We must have had money. We didn't have that much money, but we had some resources to help them because we were funded by a foundation. And they weren't quite sure what to do with us, so they asked us to offer trainings. And I saw an awful lot of Americans and Canadians and others, you know, from the UK or Germany or Australia, but particularly from the US, coming in and offering a week of training and leaving. And to me, that was, I'm not sure what that accomplished. Maybe it gave people some new language and ideas of very specific tactics, but not much. And what I came to realize was when I worked in places over time, was that there was a purpose for me coming in and doing a brief initial training, and that purpose was they could check me out. And that was a context in which we could begin to get to know each other. And I could give them just some of my language, and I could turn that into a dialogue, a training like that. But then over time, if we really wanted to be helpful to people, what we needed to do was learn from them, and they would learn from us. And we needed to interact over time and understand their circumstance and make use of our cultural differences to point out things to each other and to get to know each other. And some of the most important things we did in those years was to party with people, to be honest, and to put the human touch on, to let it our hair down. And then over time, when they had developed their own sense and had tried of how they might bring people together or how they might deal with issues, informed in part by us, but in part by their own interactions and thinking and consideration and game playing with each other, then maybe we could offer a training in which they would hear what we had to say and try out what we would say and would immediately put it in their own context. And they, of course, could be offering training to us. And then there were things very specifically, for example, that we knew that we could help them with, such as how do you fundraise where most of the money is from, you know, Western foundations or governments or stuff like that. And that was a very rewarding process. And I learned a lot from it. I mean, it helped me develop my own practice as a mediator, and also some important friendships. So I may have wandered off from your question a little bit.
Perfect. Because that's what I'm saying, that look, mediation, you going out and talking to people, you took a certain aspect of mediation with you. So that also, in a way, if something is, I mean, that formal thing is not there, so what you bring in, obviously, for them, but that becomes mediation. But just one thing I just want to say, that Tabitha watching, I'm just telling her, you can drop in. People have become really relaxed. She's working and watching this. Everyone on this YouTube thing has made it very easy for people. So I'm just telling Tabitha, if she wants, she can drop in. But one connection I'm trying to make, Bernie, is because of the fact the development of mediation in a country like India is just about happening outside the court system. In the court system, it's been there for some time. So today we have Mr. Shriram Panchu. He's a senior mediator here, and he has, of course, written an article also. His issue is now judges are taking control of mediation. They are being, of course, within themselves, that whole thing that there's some, I mean, serving Supreme Court judges set up they call it the arbitration center, but doing mediation under that. So I'm just thinking that if judges have done this right now in India, I don't know what was happening in the US or Canada, that neutrality somewhere connected with mediation come in from the fact that judges came in and then you expected them to be neutral, so you expected mediators to be neutral? I'm just trying to make a connection somewhere. I don't know where I'm going in the right direction, but somewhere
Yeah,
in that.
no. Well, that's happened in the U.S. too, where a nice gig for retired judges is they can offer themselves as judicial arbitrators and judicial mediators, and sometimes they do good work, but a lot of times, they bring to it, I'm just going to be a settlement judge, and no matter what my context is. And I think when judges offer neutrality, they're and objectivity, there's a problem there too. I mean, because there are structures they need to follow that and applicable principles they need to apply in their decision making, and hopefully they will try very hard to apply it. But I don't think my experience of working with judges, look at the U.S. Supreme Court, they are anything but objective or neutral. They are bringing their own values and their upbringing and their religion, and who appointed them and who they feel personally accountable to, and et cetera, to every decision they make. Well, almost every decision they make. But I do think it is. So I think there's a critique to be made there. But I do think that, again, they're going to say, oh, look, I have all this experience as a neutral and a decision maker, and where I bring objective analytical information. And by the way, this is why lawyers have also taken over the field more and more and more, because the assumption is all this is legal knowledge is very helpful. And I've done some of my most important mediators where my co-mediator was a lawyer. Or a law professor, as in the case of my wife, but it is not. It is not the only thing you need, and there are ways of getting expertise in. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to come from that background, but because lawyers offer that model in a way that is socially accepted, that the institution accepts it, they've actually gradually become more and more and more. The most prevalent deliverers of services of mediation in families and in commercial disputes, in business, in business disputes, and I think that's a problem, because I think they have something to offer, but so do a lot of other people. Like a friend of mine, they've also enforced their standards of the unauthorized practice of law in a way that often ties mediators' hands. So in many places in the US and Canada, if you are not a lawyer, it's very hard for you to draft an agreement or to negotiate the part of a divorce, let's say, that is financial. Whereas lawyers don't necessarily have special training in psychology or child development, but they can do and they can do a very good job often. The part of it that has to do with parenting or child custody arrangements. So, I think that I think there is a sense then that that goes along with that certain fields represent objectivity and analytical neutrality and in applying system rules in a way that others do not. And judges are a great example of that. I'm very, very, this is a whole nother subject, but I am very, very suspicious of professional organizations or that create rules of who can practice, because I think in many ways that is about protecting the business of the profession and not the public. So I think almost all unauthorized practice of law regulations are not helpful.
Absolutely. But I think maybe, of course, somewhere colonization does fit into, for me, in that dispute resolution, like I said, the connection with the court and lawyers, that part of it. The other part of it, that of this aspect that you are, I don't know, I mean, neutral in that whole process is what you came in for to the colonizers institution, because you felt that this was that kind of person. So in the development of mediation, I'm just thinking that have we then not disconnected from that aspect and still had there's some expectation there? I don't know. I mean, I'm making some connection. I'm trying to see, because this is something which is developing here, and because of this, what Mr. Panchu has been talking about, this judges aspect. I'm just thinking that when mediation started developing outside the court system or within the court system also, I don't know how it was developing there, but this aspect of that connection with that whole concept of a judge doing it and the judges taking a role in it and all, did that create this word coming into the picture? When did that word come into the development? Because obviously it's been years now. So I don't know if that process, there is something in the terms of history that you have for the word itself.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And I'm sure it is colonization of a form, as the whole judicial system that you have, in a way, comes from colonial experiences. But it's not. Let's take a step back and consider the whole concept of professionalization and the formation of professions, because I think that's all related. Why is a psychologist an expert on certain things? And somebody, like what children's needs are, and somebody who has been a childcare worker or has run a preschool for kids for 20 years is not. Why is it that way? Why did they have that? Why why are certain people who have had great experience in practical applications of science not able to be scientific experts, and other people are? I mean, I think the list goes on, and judges are particularly powerful examples because the legal system rules so much in our lives, and they're the sort of the top of the pyramid of that, supposedly. We could argue about that one too, but we could talk about that one too. I mean, but that's I think that's there. I think there's something very important that, but I wanted to ask you something about it. Do you see mediation itself as a form of colonial development?
Look, I'm telling you the one that we are seeing, in the sense, the box that is being spread around because of this aspect of, for me, it's in this country, it's connected to the court system. And I am saying that aspect is still now that the colonization mindset being that all dispute resolution has to happen in courts. Because I'm saying outside that, there is nothing here. I mean, the handful of people like me, maybe, who are only practicing as mediators outside the court system, as private mediators, as we call them. Everyone is connected there. So I'm saying that this is the way that the judiciary has put it out there, that dispute resolution has to happen in the courts, and then connecting a process which has nothing to do with the courts. That issue I had with that, now this aspect of judges taking over outside the courts, and again, well, look, people connect.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So the judges are now saying, well, we're even going to try to take over those things that happen outside of the court purview.
Yes.
By the way, I'm speaking next week to Supreme Court mediation program in India.
So you can take this up, because you can always quote Mr. Panchu. I'll send you his article. He's been very strong on his words there.
Yeah, please do, because it's next Tuesday I'm doing it, so I'd love to read it before that. Well, no, I think that I believe that's happening because similar things have happened here. That natural, indigenous, or local systems of dispute resolution, are becoming more and more legalized and put in the purview of formal systems. Now, there is a larger issue here, which is a lot of our informal connections across our differences have broken down. There was an interesting book written a number of years ago by a guy named Robert Putnam in the United States called Bowling Alone. And it talked about how we don't we are more and more engaged in our community. Are those ties, which in systems language you can call strong ties, are our dominant experience. But the weak ties, the ties that are across our differences, are breaking down. We live with more people who think like us. We are different organizations that might bring us together across our differences. Like if we play, football with people, well, that happens more and more in more like-minded, like class, like cultural communities. So a lot of the ways in which, for example, oftentimes religious leaders would be historically the important dispute intervention people. They represent a smaller, not necessarily smaller, but a narrower and narrower group. They don't go across differences. There is no religious leader who could easily in the U.S. resolve a dispute between a evangelical white Baptist and a black Methodist. There isn't that sort of a natural ties across communities. They are how that's happened is really interesting, but it's geographical now. More and more it's geographical. People who have different views on fundamental issues live in entirely separate communities. So that is a problem that kind of leaves a wide open space for formalistic processes to come in, which are going to be more superficial, I think.
I think good thing that you've pointed out today, or you normally do use that terminology, and I say the American society is individualistic. I think this is a good thing. It's a diverse society. We can't say that for the society in general. So I'm not going to say it from now because it's very easy to. It's very easy to say that and make a generalization. And of course, in one of the discussions at the conference, someone said Indian culture. I said there is no Indian culture. We are so diverse. How can you even say there's an Indian culture? So that kind of a thing, I think sometimes this generalization on the reverse, I should not have done when I was talking about it from this perspective.
It's easy to do. I mean, we all have all these stereotypes of places that we don't have intimate knowledge of, even the ones we do sometimes. But, I moved to Canada about 18 years ago, and we're much smaller. We're like 1/10 the size of the United States in terms of population. We're bigger in terms of land, but and so we often think of Canada in a more homogenous way, but it's not. It's a very diverse society too. I mean, I think there's diversity almost everywhere, even if it's not the kind we think of in some ways.
So I think about Bennett, 4 things have come out from our discussion. Of course, one, you have to maybe write a book on the history of the word neutrality in mediation, where it started, how it happened. So that would definitely you have to write. I sent you an email saying
if somebody who wants to write that book should come talk to me. I'm happy to help them, but that's not me.
The other thing I asked you, I sent a mail that asked Julie if she wants to do a session in the conference on You Can't Buy My Silence, if she has time. So that should be the other thing. I also wrote to Jackie that I marked you in that mail saying that if she wants to talk about colonization and decolonization, I haven't heard from her. I wanted her to come in this also. I sent a mail, I marked her there. I marked you in that also. The other thing, I think John Paul Lederach, I haven't been able to get him on my shows. Maybe I don't know whether he's on. I mean, he is on LinkedIn. I've sent him messages there. Maybe that's not the right place to send messages to people. I don't know. So please talk to him. Tell him to please come.
I haven't talked to John Paul in a number of. I'd love to talk to him again. But anyhow, because our lives, we live in different parts of the world now, but although we did have an email interchange very recently, which was very nice. So yeah, look, I certainly will pass this on to Julie and Jackie. We'll see about John Paul. But
actually,
But you have their email. You should write them.
I
directly.
did. Jackie, I wrote the mail. But other thing I should have done is that now Michael Lang's session is after. I mean, Nina's session is next, and after that, Michael. I should have put your sessions together. At least you would have met here. I'm sure you meet otherwise, but I think maybe
Michael
you
and
have.
I, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
Michael's a very old friend of mine.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I should have kept the sessions together. I mean, one after the other. If you would have met him also, I don't know whether he's going to. If I mean, it'd be nice. I don't know if you people end up actually meeting on Zoom and all, but or do you? I mean, just have some exchange of emails or something.
Well, we've been guests in each other's house, and I've known Michael for many years. I would love that.
Yeah, perfect. So when I think now finally, Beneath on the large, I will still go back to the mediation vision 2026. If you want to do it from the neutrality perspective, from that perspective, that if you are developing mediation in your country, this aspect that word may have been taken up and used, and it's been used a little too much. Please do not look at it from the perspective that you've been shown it. There are more sides to it. Something there, a larger message. I would really want that to go from you, because the American model, the American box does go out a lot, and people think of it as the holy grail kind of thing. Is there some message that you want to send there? It's really important.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to say, I think it's quite remarkable, this World Conference you've put together. I wish I could have been a part of more sessions, but I've certainly looked at what you have and kind of checked in to some of them. And good on you. Good on you.
And we'll next year I'm going to make it bigger. This was only say about 1 month or less of getting things together. We'll have more time now. We'll put in more topics.
Okay. Good.
So no message for the world on how neutrality has to be treated when you're developing mediation in your country. Something there you want to?
Well, I'd say watch out for that word, because it is a word that is that and objectivity and impartiality tend to be words that the powerful use to say, trust me. And if you need basic systems change, or even, and I'm not talking about necessarily macro systems, just even in your own families, neutrality is a very troubling concept. Help from people who are going to help you think through your choices and talk about them and hear each other. That's a good thing at the right time. Dialogue is a good thing if it's done in the right way at the right time. And if it takes into account power issues. But ask yourself, what is it you really want? And what do you need that maybe the word neutrality you think conveys? And use those words instead. And don't narrow your thinking about how help can be delivered, the skills people can have, and what you want people to be held accountable for. That maybe is another thing we haven't. One of the things that you might argue what neutrality at least does is it conveys a message that we could be held accountable to about what will be. I think we need to be held accountable for being honest, for our transparency, for our authenticity, for our commitment to help people in the best way we know how. But those are the kind of questions I think in whatever context you ought to be asking, and not try to think, okay, now we've suddenly solved all of that by saying we're going to be neutral and impartial and objective, because that covers a host of sins.
Because Maria, I'm going to take you to one aspect which will come into discussion as we go along, because the Singapore Convention has been signed by the US also, not ratified yet, but signed. Now, in the Singapore Convention, one of the grounds for refusal of enforcement, I just want you to maybe read that and then tell me what you think of it, because maybe as neutrality comment that also. Let me just put it up for you. It says, I will just basically just read this clause. This is under the grounds for refusing to grant relief. Okay, it says there was serious breach by the mediator of standards applicable to the mediator. Now, what would you put there as standards applicable to a mediator?
Oh, that they failed to declare who they were, what their background was, what their connections to people were that were important for people to understand. That if they offered confidentiality, which not all mediation does, but if they offered it, they didn't abide by it. They violated it.
Because why I'm coming to this neutral part of it, because all it says, I mean, this is what's going to come up. It says that, and of course, this is the next one I read after that. Standards applicable to the mediator, without which breach that party would not have entered into the settlement agreement. Now, is it just an allegation that you make, of course, and because neutrality has become part of the word in the whole mediation world, and he says this my mediator was not neutral. And that's why, I mean, is it going to be that simple? I'm just trying to put it down to
it is. That's what people will do. They will say the mediator was not neutral, and they will be right, because neutrality is such a fuzzy concept. They'll find some connection. They'll find something that was said. I may have said to somebody, wait a second, we need to give somebody else a chance to talk. We've heard you, but this person isn't there. They'll say, wait a second, he interrupted me when I was saying something important that wasn't neutral.
Exactly.
That gave somebody else who was about to agree to what I said I was offering, that made them think about it and not agree to it. That wasn't their role. That wasn't their job. They're not being neutral.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying, because when you say standards applicable to the mediator, and then the neutral word comes into that, normally people talk about it. So do we need to disassociate it to that extent that it doesn't become a standard applicable to a mediator? I'm trying to get that.
Right. And if a mediator says, I'm going to be a neutral, impartial, unbiased third party, if I were a client, I would always say, tell me what that means.
Okay, so now we obviously don't have too much time, but we did not get Nina in, which normally happens. That's why people don't maybe come in. Nina, is something I want to ask, because she's read your book, at least one book I know she's read. Yes, Nina.
No, I'm just listening, and I'm just getting all the wisdom soaked into my own system. But I think it's a very interesting discussion, and I totally agree that it's very difficult to be neutral, if anyone can be, because it all comes from our own experiences and how we were brought up. But we meet people and things happen.
Perfect.
Yeah, and those experiences and how we were brought up, they're important. We shouldn't try to say that's not, we're going to put that aside. That's who we are. That's how we create the human connection. But I mean, I think that's right.
And that's what the whole series Evolution of a Mediator is about, which Bernie doesn't like, the fact that the past, what atmosphere was brought up in, all that, and the people that your mother and father were or grandfather was, they're all important elements on who you are.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You asked me, I did once write an article for a journal on a review of 50 years of I think it was from the Association of Family Conciliation Courts, 50 years of a reflection on 50 years of family mediation. And it was interesting to look backwards at it, looking forwards towards what's going to happen in 2026 and beyond. I wish I could predict. I have hopes. I see trends, but I don't trust any of our abilities to predict what's going to happen in the future. So
the only reason for that was to put it out there. It was only because other people should not make the mistakes that, in your experience, you feel have been made. Don't reinvent the wheel when there is. So both aspects for that.
That's very good. That's good. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Bernie. Always a pleasure speaking to you, and
always a pleasure speaking to you. It was very nice to meet you, Nina, and I hope you and I will figure out a time to finally finish this.
It's not finally finishing it. We will continue it. We will take it in the slow process that it is. Look, it's like lying there. We'll put it all together, whenever it has to happen. But let's put everything there. So we'll take it slow. Whenever you give me time, not a problem. We'll take it slowly. We won't say we have to finish it, wrap it up in the next episode. Nothing like that. It's a journey. It's a journey.
journey. I accept that. I think that's good.
Perfect. So
Thanks
thank you very
again
much.
for what you're doing, Vikram. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for being part of it.